Naples is a city that glitters in the sunlight. Tourists see pizza ovens, crowded piazzas, and the shadow of Mount Vesuvius rising above the bay. But ask anyone who grew up here, and they'll tell you this city has two faces. Because when the sun goes down, another Naples comes alive, a city where shopkeepers pay insurance to men they can't refuse, where entire neighborhoods are run not by politicians but by clans, and where fortunes are made not in banks but in the shadows of the black market. This isn't the Sicilian Mafia. There is no godfather at the top, no single council pulling the strings. The Camorra is something else, something more dangerous. A network of clans, splintered yet connected, competing yet surviving. A machine without a king, built to outlast every raid, every arrest, every so-called final crackdown. For more than 2 centuries, the Camorra has thrived in the chaos of Naples. Smuggling, counterfeiting, drug trafficking, even controlling toxic waste. To the government, it is a cancer. But to thousands of Neapolitans struggling to survive, it has been an employer, a provider, even a protector. It is not just a mafia. It is an empire hidden in plain sight, an empire built on fear, blood, and the endless demand of the black market. Tonight, we uncover the story of the Camorra's hidden empire. Naples, in the late 18th century, was a city bursting at its seams. Crowded alleyways twisted through neighborhoods where laundry lines sagged overhead, and the smell of frying oil drifted from small kitchens that clung to survival. Grand palaces and opera houses rose above the filth, reminders that this had once been a jewel of Europe, a city of music, art, and aristocracy. Yet beneath the marble facades and church bells lay a restless underclass, a people hardened by poverty, suspicion, and centuries of foreign rule. It was here, in the dirt and desperation of Naples, that the earliest whispers of the Camorra began to take shape. The origins are hazy, blurred by myth and rumor. Some say the Camorra was born in the dark cells of Bourbon prisons, where inmates organized into factions for protection and profit. These groups developed their own rituals, hand signals, and codes of loyalty, binding men together with oaths that mattered more than any law the state could enforce. When prisoners were released, they carried these networks into the streets, transplanting their brotherhoods into Naples itself. Others claim the roots go even further back, to Spanish secret societies and street guilds absorbed and reshaped by Neapolitan life. Whatever the truth, by the dawn of the 19th century, the Camorra was no longer just a rumor. It was a presence. Unlike the Sicilian Mafia, which clung to rigid hierarchies and a code of silence, the Camorra grew into something far more fluid. It was not one family, not one kingdom ruled by a single don, but dozens of small crews, each claiming its own territory in the maze-like streets of Naples. In Forcella, a crew might control gambling dens. In Santa Lucia, another might run smuggling routes from the docks. Each had its boss, but no boss ruled them all. This made the Camorra slippery, impossible to pin down, and more resilient than any top-heavy criminal organization could ever be. Naples in those years was fertile soil for such an organism. The state was weak, often absent, and when it did appear, it was more concerned with maintaining appearances than solving the daily suffering of its people. Elections were bought and sold, police were corrupt, and for the poor, survival meant bending rules or breaking them entirely. The Camorra slid into this void like water into cracks, offering protection, employment, and order, albeit their own brutal version of it. A shopkeeper could not rely on the police to protect his stall from theft, but he could rely on the neighborhood Camorrist, who for a weekly fee ensured that no thief dared lay a hand on his goods. Of course, the thieves themselves often answered to the same Camorrist, but the shopkeeper understood the arrangement. It was protection, even if it was protection from the very hand that threatened him. By the mid-19th century, the Camorra had seeped into every corner of Neapolitan life. They had become masters of the streets, visible in gambling houses, in the shadow of markets, in the alleys where young men gathered at night. Their influence extended upward, too, touching politics and law. Camorrist bosses acted as vote brokers, delivering ballots to whichever politician paid them most. In return, those politicians offered favors, contracts, and immunity from prosecution. It was a mutually beneficial corruption, and the ordinary people saw it unfold with little surprise. In Naples, power had always been for sale. One of the earliest public glimpses of the Camorra's grip came during the trial of 1911, when an infamous case exposed their reach into law enforcement itself. But long before that, whispers of their control had become a part of the city's daily conversation. People lowered their voices when speaking of certain men or avoided mentioning them at all. There was a sense that these clans, though fractured, collectively formed an invisible government, stronger than the official one. Imagine the scene in the early 1800s. A crowded piazza in the Quartiere Spagnoli. Children darting barefoot between fruit stalls, women bargaining loudly over tomatoes, soldiers strolling in crisp uniforms. Among them, men leaned against walls, watching quietly, their presence enough to remind everyone that the square did not belong to the police or the crown, but to the Camorra. They dressed like anyone else, often indistinguishable from ordinary citizens, yet everyone knew who they were. If trouble broke out, they settled it. If a fight erupted, they decided who was in the right. Their judgment was law. What made the Camorra truly unique was its decentralization. Where the Sicilian Mafia could be crippled by the death of a godfather, the Camorra had no single figurehead. If one clan leader was imprisoned or killed, others rose instantly to take his place. This meant the Camorra could survive not just years of repression, but centuries of it. Governments changed, regimes rose and fell, and still the Camorra endured. Like a disease embedded in the bloodstream of Naples, it adapted, spreading into whatever new opportunity appeared. Even in those early years, they showed a knack for finding profit where others saw only scraps. Gambling dens flourished under their control, from cards and dice to betting on street fights. Smuggling, too, was an early staple, whether it was food, weapons, or contraband goods slipping through Naples' busy port. The Camorra learned quickly that Naples' geography, its sprawling docks, its hidden coves, its endless alleys, was their greatest weapon. The state could send soldiers, but soldiers could not be everywhere. The Camorra was everywhere. The social conditions of Naples added fuel to the fire. The city was infamous for its poverty. Overcrowded tenements packed families into single rooms, disease spread like wildfire, and unemployment was rampant. In such conditions, young men saw few paths to survival. The Camorra offered one. A boy could start as a lookout, a runner carrying messages or contraband, and with enough cunning, he could rise to control a territory of his own. The risk was great, but so was the promise of power and wealth in a city where most would never escape hunger. Stories circulated of Camorrist bosses who walked through their neighborhoods like kings, handing out coins to children, paying for funerals, settling disputes between families. They were feared, but they were also respected, even admired. To many in Naples, they were more present, more reliable, and more effective than the distant government offices that rarely seemed to care whether the people lived or died. This dual role, criminal overlord and local benefactor, would become a defining trait of the Camorra for centuries to come. But there was always blood beneath the surface. Clans fought over territory with knives and pistols, and feuds sometimes erupted into full-scale wars that left corpses in the alleys and blood on the cobblestones. Loyalty was fragile, alliances temporary. Yet, even in the midst of violence, the system never collapsed. A fallen boss was replaced, a shattered clan reassembled, and the machine kept moving. As the 19th century wore on, the Camorra grew bolder. They extended their reach into city contracts, construction projects, and politics at higher levels. Their vote-buying operations became essential to ambitious politicians, who in turn shielded them from serious prosecution. By the time Italy was unified in the 1860s, the Camorra was entrenched so deeply in Naples that the new authorities quickly realized brute force alone would never eradicate them. They launched crackdowns, arrested gang leaders, and staged public trials. But the effect was always temporary. One clan fell, another rose. One boss was exiled, another appeared. The truth was simple. The Camorra thrived not in spite of Naples' poverty and chaos, but because of it. The city's instability was their lifeblood. As long as the government remained corrupt and the people remained desperate, the Camorra would endure. And so, in the crowded alleys of Naples under the shadow of Vesuvius, the foundations of a hidden empire were laid. An empire unlike any other in Italy, decentralized, adaptable, invisible, yet omnipresent. An empire that would, in time, grow into one of the most powerful black market machines the world has ever known. Naples in the 20th century was a city caught between tradition and modernity. Its alleys still pulsed with the same chaotic life that had shaped the Camorra for centuries. But now the stakes were higher, the opportunities greater, and the violence more spectacular. If Chapter 1 of this hidden empire was about survival, building roots in a city abandoned by its rulers, then the second chapter was about transformation. This was the era when the Camorra revealed its greatest weapon, decentralization. Most people imagine mafias as pyramids. At the top sits the boss of bosses, the Don, who issues orders downward like a monarch commanding his court. Sicily had such figures. Calabria's 'Ndrangheta did too. But Naples was different. Here no man could claim total dominion. Dozens of clans shared the city like scavengers feeding on the same carcass. Each family ruled its own slice of territory, sometimes a single neighborhood, sometimes a cluster of towns. But no one ruled them all. To outsiders, this looked like chaos. To Neapolitans, it was simply the way things were. This design was not a weakness. It was the Camorra's survival mechanism. Whenever the police captured a boss, the clan didn't collapse. Leadership shifted to a cousin, a lieutenant, or a younger brother. If a family fell apart entirely, rivals absorbed its soldiers, reshaped the map, and business continued uninterrupted. Like the lava flows of Vesuvius, the Camorra never disappeared. It only shifted course, carving new channels through the city. One striking example came in the post-war years, when Naples became Europe's capital of smuggling. The city's port, already famous for its chaos, turned into a playground for contraband. Cigarettes, luxury goods, even stolen cars poured in through the docks, and the clans rushed to seize control. The Giuliano family in Forcella built an empire on tobacco, turning their district into a fortress where even police hesitated to enter. They were rich, flamboyant, and bold, distributing contraband by the ton. Yet, even at their peak, the Giulianos could not dictate to the entire Camorra. Dozens of other families thrived in parallel, some cooperating, others competing violently. Naples was not a monarchy. It was a marketplace. This marketplace mentality set the Camorra apart. In Sicily, disobedience to the Mafia's central authority could mean certain death. In Naples, defiance was expected. Alliances shifted constantly. Clans fought over territory, and betrayals were as common as handshakes. What held the system together was not hierarchy, but profit. As long as everyone was making money, the machine kept running. By the 1960s and 70s, this machine was running at full speed. Smuggling was not just a sideline. It was the beating heart of Naples. Cigarette cartons arrived in bulk from North Africa and the Balkans, unloaded in the dead of night along the sprawling coastline. Boys carried them through the alleys, women repackaged them in their kitchens, vendors sold them openly in the markets. To the outside world, it looked like crime. To Neapolitans, it was an economy. For many families, contraband was the only steady income they had. But decentralization had a darker side. With no single boss to impose order, disputes often exploded into violence. Clan wars were not rare events, but recurring storms, sweeping through Naples every decade or so. One of the bloodiest erupted in the 1980s, when Raffaele Cutolo, a former small-time gangster with a taste for grandeur, attempted to do what no one had done before: unify the Camorra. Cutolo was a prisoner when he conceived his plan, locked away in Poggio Reale prison. But his charisma, combined with his ruthlessness, made him a legend inside those walls. He formed what he called the Nuova Camorra Organizzata, the new organized Camorra. His idea was simple but radical: bring the clans together under a single banner, impose structure, and channel their power toward larger profits. Cutolo was less a gangster than a would-be monarch, envisioning himself as the supreme boss of Naples. For a brief, terrifying moment, he almost succeeded. From behind bars, Cutolo recruited hundreds of soldiers, young men desperate for status and money. His organization expanded rapidly, extorting businesses, trafficking drugs, and intimidating rivals. Politicians whispered about his influence, judges feared his reach. It seemed the Camorra might finally take the shape of a pyramid. But pyramids are fragile in Naples. The other clans bristled at Cutolo's ambition. They had no desire to kneel to a would-be king. Resistance formed, alliances shifted, and soon the city erupted in bloodshed. Wars raged across the streets, bodies piled up in alleys, and entire neighborhoods became battlefields. The very decentralization that had made the Camorra resilient now became its weapon against itself. Cutolo's dream of unification dissolved in the gunfire. When he was finally crushed, his empire dismantled, his followers scattered. The lesson was clear. The Camorra could never be ruled by one man. Its strength lay precisely in its fragmentation. A dozen smaller fires were harder to extinguish than a single blaze. From that moment on, any boss who dreamed of total control was reminded of Cutolo's fate. Yet even these wars could not stop the black market machine. If anything, they accelerated its evolution. The chaos of the 1980s paved the way for a shift from smuggled tobacco to cocaine, a far more lucrative trade. Globalization was changing the underworld, and Naples was perfectly positioned to profit. Its port, its poverty, its endless supply of recruits all made it a natural hub for international narcotics. Colombian cartels found eager partners in the Neapolitan clans who used their decentralized networks to flood Europe with cocaine. At the same time, the Camorra infiltrated legitimate industries. Construction contracts, waste management, even city hall projects all bore their fingerprints. In the notorious case of toxic waste dumping, clans made millions by illegally disposing of industrial refuse in the countryside around Naples, poisoning land and water for generations. But to the clans, it was just another business, another stream of profit flowing into the hidden empire. This constant adaptation explains why the Camorra has outlasted every government attempt to eradicate it. Police raids could capture individuals, but they could not dismantle the structure because there was no single structure to dismantle. Politicians could promise crackdowns, but they often found themselves compromised, having accepted votes or favors from Camorrist intermediaries. The Camorra was not just a criminal organization, it was woven into the fabric of Naples itself. On the ground, life continued as it always had. In the narrow alleys, children played soccer while lookouts kept watch for police cars. Shopkeepers paid their weekly insurance fees, knowing it was cheaper to cooperate than resist. Weddings of Camorrist families became lavish spectacles with fireworks, fleets of cars, and guests numbering in the thousands. Public displays of wealth that were both celebration and warning. The people watched, half in awe, half in fear, fully aware that these were the true rulers of their city. What made it more chilling was the Camorra's visibility. In Sicily, bosses often lived in the shadows, hidden away in villas, avoiding attention. In Naples, many Camorrist leaders flaunted their wealth: gold chains, flashy suits, expensive cars. They were not ashamed to show who they were. They walked through their territories like kings, openly admired by some, resented by others, but never ignored. Their message was simple: we are here, we are powerful, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. By the late 20th century, the Camorra had become not just a local force, but a global one. Their networks reached across Europe, into South America, and even into Asia. Yet their heart remained in Naples, beating in rhythm with the city's chaos. The clans shifted constantly, some rising, others falling, but the machine endured, just as it always had. To outsiders, it seemed baffling that such an organization could survive for so long. But for Neapolitans, the answer was simple. The Camorra was not an alien presence imposed on the city. It was the city, born from its poverty, sustained by its corruption, fueled by its resilience. Every crackdown only pruned its branches, never touching its roots. And so, as Naples entered the 21st century, the Camorra remained as powerful as ever. It was no longer just about gambling dens or smuggled cigarettes. It was about global drug trafficking, construction empires, counterfeit industries, and toxic waste. It was about clans that ruled like local governments, families that spanned generations, and a network that was both chaotic and unbreakable. This was the paradox of Naples' hidden empire, a system with no king, yet stronger than any monarchy. A machine without a crown, yet more enduring than any dynasty. An empire of shadows, thriving not in spite of chaos, but because of it. After the Second World War, Naples was a city in ruins. Bombs had torn through its neighborhood. Its economy was shattered, and its people were hungry. American soldiers had come and gone, leaving behind black market cigarettes, canned food, and the dream of prosperity that never quite arrived. In the rubble of this broken city, the Camorra found its golden opportunity. The war had taught Naples two things. First, that survival belonged to those willing to bend the rules, and second, that smuggling was not a side hustle. It was the city's lifeblood. The black market had always existed here, but now it became the beating heart of Naples' post-war identity. And at the center of it all was a product so small it could fit in a pocket, yet so powerful it could bankroll entire empires: cigarettes. The contraband trade was not new. Even in the 19th century, Neapolitans had smuggled salt, silk, and alcohol to dodge the state's taxes. But in the years after the war, the craving for tobacco was insatiable. Soldiers had introduced the habit to entire generations, and factory production could not keep up. In came the Camorra, ready to exploit demand. Shipments of American and Balkan cigarettes were unloaded at night on the docks of Naples, spirited through narrow alleys, and sold by an army of street peddlers. For a few lire, you could get a pack stamped with foreign letters, a taste of the outside world, a puff of rebellion against the poverty around you. By the 1950s, cigarette smuggling was not just a business. It was an institution. Whole neighborhoods became dependent on it. Boys as young as 10 acted as lookouts, whistling when police approached. Women sold contraband packs from doorways. Even priests turned a blind eye, knowing that without smuggling, their parishioners would starve. The Camorra organized the trade like a shadow government, taxing vendors, paying off dock workers, bribing customs officials. They created a parallel economy that moved faster than the official one, and soon the Camorra's reach extended beyond Naples, spreading contraband across Italy and into northern Europe. This new empire was unlike the old rackets of extortion or petty crime. It was vast, industrial, and global, and it reshaped the Camorra itself. The clans who mastered smuggling grew rich, powerful, and ruthless. They were no longer content to be street thugs. They became businessmen of the shadows. One of the most infamous figures of this era was Michele Zaza, known as the Prince of Contraband. Rising from the crowded streets of Naples, Zaza built an empire on smuggled cigarettes. He struck deals with foreign suppliers, ran fleets of speedboats to outpace the Coast Guard, and funneled millions of lire into Camorra coffers. His smuggling routes stretched across the Mediterranean, linking Naples to Marseille, the Balkans, and beyond. To some, he was a criminal genius. To others, a symbol of Naples' corruption. But either way, Zaza embodied the transformation of the Camorra, from local gangs into an international black market machine. The state tried to fight back, of course. Police raids seized shipments, Coast Guard boats chased smugglers across the waves, and officials declared victory after every arrest. But it was like trying to catch water with bare hands. For every boat intercepted, 5 slipped through. For every smuggler jailed, another took his place. The decentralization of the Camorra made it unstoppable. Unlike the Sicilian Mafia, there was no single boss to eliminate, no single council to dismantle. Each clan ran its own slice of the trade, and even when rivals fought bloody wars, the business kept flowing. The cigarette empire was more than just money. It was also culture. In Naples, Smuggling became woven into the city's identity. Songs were written about contraband, films romanticized the daring smugglers, and in the eyes of many Neapolitans, these men were not villains, but providers. They gave jobs where the state gave nothing. They brought in money when factories closed and politicians ignored the South. It was easy to see the Camorra as the real authority, the only system that worked. But the cigarette boom was only the beginning. With smuggling networks firmly in place, the Camorra had built the infrastructure of a global trafficking machine, and soon they would find far more lucrative cargo to move than tobacco. The 1970s brought a new product, one that would reshape organized crime across the world: heroin. Naples became a crucial hub in the so-called Pizza Connection, the international drug pipeline linking Turkish opium, Sicilian refiners, American distributors, and Camorra middlemen. Clans that had once thrived on cigarettes now trafficked in white powder, raking in profits that dwarfed anything seen before. The same speedboats that once carried cartons of smokes now ferried kilos of heroin. And with drugs came blood. Rival clans battled for supremacy, turning Naples into a war zone where shootouts erupted in broad daylight. The city earned a new nickname: the Bronx of Italy. Still, the old cigarette trade never disappeared. Even as heroin and later cocaine dominated headlines, contraband tobacco remained a constant stream of income. It was safer, less risky than drugs, and deeply rooted in Neapolitan life. For the Camorra, it was the perfect fallback: steady, profitable, and culturally accepted. By the 1980s, the Camorra had become something extraordinary: a hybrid between street gangs, business cartels, and multinational smugglers. They controlled ports, infiltrated unions, laundered money through construction and finance, and bribed their way into politics. Naples was their kingdom, but their influence stretched across Europe. Wherever there was a demand for cheap, illegal goods, the Camorra had a hand in supplying it. The irony was bitter. The Italian state, for all its raids and declarations of war, could never kill the contraband trade because it had become part of the social fabric. Too many families depended on it. Too many politicians benefited from it. Too many officials were paid to look away. Smuggling was not a crime in Naples. It was a way of life. And so the Camorra endured, while other criminal organizations rose and fell, torn apart by arrests or betrayals. The Camorra's decentralized structure allowed it to adapt. When one clan was crushed, another rose. When one trade dried up, another appeared. It was not a rigid pyramid, but a shifting marketplace of power, fueled by the black market and sustained by the people's need. The cigarette wars of Naples revealed the Camorra's greatest strength: resilience. Where governments faltered, they thrived. Where economies collapsed, they found opportunity. They had no single face, no single leader, and therefore no single weakness. Naples had been rebuilt from the rubble of war, but in its shadows another city existed, a city ruled by smuggling, by clans, by the endless hunger of the black market. And it was here, in the smoke-filled alleys and bustling docks, that the Camorra's hidden empire was forged. The black market machine of the Camorra had already proven unstoppable. Cigarettes, smuggling, bribery. These were trades that had made the clans rich and embedded them into Naples' everyday life. But as the 1970s turned to the 1980s, the world of organized crime changed. A new product flooded Europe and America, one far more addictive and infinitely more profitable than tobacco. For the Camorra, it was the beginning of a new golden age, but also the opening chapter of a blood-soaked nightmare. The drug was cocaine, imported from South America, refined through networks controlled by Sicilian Mafia intermediaries, and distributed across Europe. It offered profits at a scale no one had imagined. A single shipment worth millions on the streets could turn a small clan into a powerful force overnight. For the Camorra, whose speedboats and smuggling channels were already perfectly suited for contraband, the transition was seamless. Cigarettes gave way to powder. The ports of Naples became gateways to Europe's booming drug markets. But with cocaine came chaos. Unlike the Sicilian Mafia, which enforced a rigid hierarchy, the Camorra was a marketplace of clans, each competing for territory, suppliers, and street dominance. There was no single boss to mediate disputes, no council to enforce peace. And so, when money and drugs collided, the result was inevitable: war. The bloodiest of these wars erupted in the early 1980s. It began with Raffaele Cutolo, a charismatic figure who sought to do what few before him had tried: unify the Camorra under his rule. Cutolo had built his power in prison, founding the Nuova Camorra Organizzata, or New Organized Camorra. From his cell, he recruited hundreds of young men, promising them wealth, brotherhood, and status. He offered structure in a world of chaos, creating a quasi-religious order with himself as its messianic leader. To many desperate Neapolitans, Cutolo was not just a boss, he was a savior. But his ambition was too great. Other clans, especially the Nuvoletta family, who were aligned with the Sicilian Mafia, saw Cutolo as a threat. The Nuvoletta clan was wealthy, cunning, and deeply entrenched in politics and legitimate businesses. They had no interest in bowing to a self-proclaimed king, and so Naples descended into a civil war. The streets of the city turned into battlefields. Drive-by shootings, assassinations, kidnappings, the violence was relentless. Entire families were wiped out in vendettas. Innocents were gunned down in crossfire. It was said that in those years, Naples buried more men than it married. The media called it the Camorra Wars, and the death toll climbed into the hundreds. The government deployed special anti-mafia units. Judges and prosecutors vowed to restore order, but the killings continued. For the clans, blood was simply another currency. One of the most chilling aspects of this war was how public it became. Unlike the Sicilian Mafia, which preferred secrecy, the Camorra's killings were brazen. Gunmen shot rivals in crowded markets, left bodies in car trunks, even executed enemies at weddings. Fear spread through Naples like a plague. Entire neighborhoods became no-go zones for police. The clans ruled with impunity, their power visible in every corner store, every marketplace, every whisper on the street. Yet even amid the carnage, the black market machine never stopped. Smuggling routes operated as normal. Drugs flowed through the ports. Extortion rackets collected money with clockwork precision. The Camorra had mastered the art of functioning in chaos. Violence was not a disruption. It was part of the system. As the 1980s bled into the 1990s, another lucrative opportunity emerged, one that revealed the Camorra's chilling pragmatism. Northern Italy, wealthy and industrial, was drowning in waste. Toxic chemicals, industrial byproducts, hazardous refuse, disposing of them legally was expensive. But in Naples, the Camorra offered a cheaper solution. For a fraction of the price, they would dispose of the waste. In reality, this meant dumping toxic barrels in fields, burying poisons beneath farmland, and poisoning rivers. Entire regions of Campania became wastelands, scarred by cancer clusters and poisoned soil. The trade became known as eco-mafia. It was perhaps the most sinister enterprise the Camorra ever controlled, for while drugs killed users, waste killed silently, indiscriminately, over generations. Children played in fields laced with toxins. Farmers unknowingly grew crops in poisoned soil, and the clans grew richer than ever. The irony was brutal. The same land that had given birth to pizza, mozzarella, and Mediterranean agriculture became a dumping ground for Europe's filth, all for the profit of the Camorra. This combination, drugs, waste, extortion, construction contracts, made the Camorra not just a mafia, but a shadow economy as large as the legal one. Entire cities were run by their money. Politicians courted their votes. Businessmen relied on their services. And yet, for all their wealth, the clans remained fractured. No single boss could unify the Camorra for long. Ambition always led to betrayal. Wars flared again and again, leaving Naples soaked in blood. The Giuliano clan of Forcella, the Licciardi of Secondigliano, the Mozzarella family, each carved out their fiefdom. Each rose and fell in cycles of power. For ordinary Neapolitans, survival meant knowing which clan controlled your neighborhood. Loyalty was enforced with violence, but also with favors. A clan might extort your shop one day, then pay for your daughter's wedding the next. To many, the Camorra was not just a criminal organization, but a parallel state, cruel, corrupt, but undeniably present. In these years, Naples became infamous worldwide. Headlines declared it Europe's most dangerous city. Journalists compared it to Medellin or the Bronx, but for those who lived there, it was simply reality. The Camorra was everywhere, in schools, in markets, in construction sites, even in hospitals. To be Neapolitan meant to exist under their shadow. Yet the most remarkable thing was not their brutality, but their resilience. Time and again, the government launched final crackdowns. Judges like Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, though more associated with the Sicilian Mafia, inspired anti-mafia efforts across Italy. Thousands of Camorra members were arrested. Bosses were jailed. Armies of police swept through Naples' alleys. And still, the machine survived. A clan destroyed in one district would be replaced by another. A leader killed would be replaced by his cousin, his brother, his wife. The Camorra was not a pyramid. It was a hydra. Cut off one head, and two more appeared. The 1990s ended with Naples weary, blooded, and poisoned, but the Camorra was far from defeated. They had outlasted every crackdown, every war, every so-called death blow. And they had evolved. No longer just smugglers or gangsters, they had become entrepreneurs of the black market, willing to traffic in anything: cigarettes, cocaine, heroin, toxic waste, weapons, even people. The city's beauty endured. Sunlight on the bay, children playing football in the streets, tourists marveling at its art and history. But beneath it all was the other Naples, the hidden empire, a marketplace of blood and shadow, sustained by demand, fueled by greed, and protected by fear. And the Camorra, fragmented yet eternal, remained its invisible ruler. The new millennium arrived in Naples not with fireworks and celebration, but with the quiet continuation of an empire that had been running in the shadows for centuries. The Camorra scarred by wars and crackdowns, had not only survived the bloody decades of the 1980s and 1990s, it had adapted, reshaped, and prepared itself for the 21st century, where governments rose and fell, where economies crashed and recovered. The Camorra's black market machine kept humming, tireless and invisible. By the early 2000s, Naples had changed, but the Camorra had changed with it. The cigarette smuggling that once fueled entire neighborhoods was no longer the crown jewel. European tobacco taxes had loosened, international policing had improved, and the profit margins shrank. But this did not mean decline. For the Camorra, cigarettes had been a training ground, a way to master logistics, bribery, and distribution. That same infrastructure was now redirected toward far more lucrative cargo, cocaine. The global drug trade had shifted. With Medellin and Cali weakened, new cartels in Colombia, Venezuela, and later Mexico sought direct entry into Europe, bypassing the saturated American market. Naples was the perfect entry point. Its ports were vast, chaotic, and riddled with corruption. Containers arrived daily from across the globe, and thousands passed through with barely a glance from customs. Hidden in these steel boxes, often buried under bananas, coffee, or electronics, were bricks of cocaine destined for Europe's insatiable markets, and standing ready to receive them were the clans of the Camorra. But this was not the work of lone smugglers anymore. By now, the Camorra had developed into alliances, loose federations of clans cooperating to maximize profit and minimize risk. The most powerful of these was the so-called Secondigliano Alliance, a coalition of families controlling Naples' northern suburbs. They built vast drug empires, turning neighborhoods like Scampia into open-air markets. Here, in crumbling housing projects, addicts lined up for doses while lookouts perched on balconies, radios in hand, alerting dealers of approaching police. Money flowed in every direction, and for a time, Scampia became Europe's largest drug supermarket, run with military precision by Camorra clans. The profits were staggering. A kilo of cocaine bought in South America for a few €1,000 could fetch tens of thousands on European streets. Multiply that by container loads, by entire shipping routes, and the sums became astronomical. Clans that had once fought over local cigarette stalls were now laundering millions through construction firms, luxury businesses, and even foreign banks. Cocaine turned the Camorra into global players, connected not just to Naples, but to cartels across oceans. But with money came ambition, and with ambition came violence. The Scampia feud erupted in the early 2000s, pitting rival clans against one another for control of the drug markets. It was a war that turned the streets of Naples into something resembling Medellin in its darkest days. Gunfights broke out in broad daylight. Corpses piled up in alleyways. Families were forced from their homes as clans turned housing blocks into fortresses. For Neapolitans, the violence was relentless, a daily reminder that their city was not their own. For the outside world, the feud exposed the Camorra's brutality, shocking even Italians accustomed to mafia violence. Yet for every feud, for every clan that rose and fell, the system endured. The very thing that made the Camorra so chaotic, its decentralization also made it indestructible. One boss could be arrested, one family wiped out, and still the black market machine continued. There was no single head to cut off, no pyramid to topple. Each clan was both competitor and collaborator, part of a larger organism that adapted with each wound. But drugs were not the only business. The toxic waste trade, born in the 1980s, expanded in the new century. Northern industries continued to rely on the Camorra for cheap disposal, and the clans perfected the art of burying poison beneath fertile soil, of disguising waste in shipments of gravel and cement, of turning whole provinces into silent graveyards of industrial filth. The area around Naples became known as the Triangle of Death, where cancer rates soared, children grew sick, and families mourned victims of an invisible war. The Camorra's profits were vast, but the cost was borne by generations of Neapolitans poisoned by their own land. Construction, too, remained fertile ground. With billions in European Union funds flowing into Italy for development, the Camorra ensured their cut. Front companies won contracts to build roads, housing, and public works. Cement was mixed with sand and water, steel was cut with cheaper substitutes, and entire structures were built on foundations of corruption. Buildings collapsed, roads cracked, but the money kept flowing. Politicians looked the other way, their campaigns funded by the very clans they claimed to oppose. And through it all, the Camorra seeped into culture. In 2006, journalist Roberto Saviano published Camorra, a blistering expose of the Camorra's empire. The book, later adapted into a film and then a hit television series, revealed the scale of their power to the world. It described not only the murders and wars, but also the quiet corruption, the construction contracts, the poisoned land. It painted Naples not as a city haunted by criminals, but as a city ruled by them. Saviano became famous, but also a target. For nearly 2 decades, he has lived under police protection, condemned to exile in his own country, proof that to write truth about the Camorra is to live under permanent threat. Yet, even as the world learned their name, the Camorra did not falter. If anything, they adapted once more. With globalization came new markets. They expanded into Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, and Eastern Europe. They partnered with Albanian gangs, Nigerian traffickers, and South American cartels. Their operations moved across borders, laundering money through offshore havens, investing in businesses from restaurants to football clubs. Naples was still their heart, but their empire was now global. The digital age brought yet another transformation. Just as they had once mastered the art of cigarettes and speedboats, now they adapted to encrypted phones, dark web marketplaces, and cryptocurrency. Younger clan members raised in a world of smartphones and online networks brought new skills to the old machine. Cocaine shipments were still unloaded at Naples's docks, but orders were placed in encrypted chats, payments made in Bitcoin, surveillance evaded by drones. The black market had gone digital, and the Camorra was not left behind. But for all its evolution, the essence of the Camorra remained unchanged. A system of clans, decentralized, resilient, thriving in the spaces where the state was weak. In neighborhoods abandoned by politicians, the clans continued to provide. They gave jobs, illegal jobs, but jobs nonetheless. They handed out loans when banks refused. They bought groceries for families, paid for weddings, even sponsored festivals. To the outsider, this might look like charity. To Neapolitans, it was the old truth. The Camorra ruled because the state did not. Today, Naples is a city of contradictions. Tourists flock to its beauty, to its food, its art, its history. Children play football in piazzas. Lovers kiss on the seafront. Life bursts from every corner. And yet, in the shadows, the hidden empire still thrives. Cocaine flows through the ports. Waste seeps into the soil. Construction contracts are carved up by clans. Politicians still whisper with fixers. The Camorra remains as much a part of Naples as Vesuvius itself. Sometimes quiet, sometimes erupting, but always present. It is tempting to think of the Camorra as a relic, a leftover from another time. But that would be a mistake. They are not fossils. They are survivors. They are not bound to the past. They are architects of the present. In a globalized world of illicit demand, they have proven what they always were: a marketplace of crime, flexible, decentralized, impossible to destroy. The Sicilian Mafia had its godfathers. The American Mafia had its dons. But the Camorra has no single face, no single voice. It is a chorus of clans, a hydra of shadows, a machine that feeds on human need and indifference. To kill it would require not just arrest, not just trials, but the rebuilding of an entire society. Until that day comes, the Camorra's hidden empire will endure, eternal as the streets of Naples themselves. And so, when night falls on the city and the alleys fill with voices and the docks whisper with shipments, the same story continues, not written in laws or history books, but in the smoke of contraband, the silence of poisoned fields, the sound of gunfire echoing between crumbling towers. Naples, a city of light and shadow. The Camorra, its eternal ruler. Naples has always been a city of contradictions. Sunlight and shadow, beauty and decay, tradition and rebellion. And the Camorra has always lived in that tension, feeding off the chaos, shaping the city's fate from the underground. Authorities have arrested bosses, dismantled clans, and declared victory more times than history can count. Yet the Camorra endures, not because it is stronger than the law, but because it has become part of the fabric of Naples itself. Decentralized, adaptable, invisible when it must be, its power is not only in the blood it spills, but in the silence it commands. To outsiders, the Camorra may look like a mafia, but to Naples, it is something else. A hidden empire built on survival. An empire that thrives where the state has failed. And like Mount Vesuvius looming over the bay, it waits, silent and steady, always threatening to erupt. This is the story of the Camorra's hidden empire. And as long as there is desperation, as long as there is money to be made in the shadows, the empire will never truly fall. Sleep well, if you can.